idea that the whole episode regarding the meat, we'll delve into that as well. Also, we have the alluded to is what we finished off from last week's parsha, which is all the karbanot, all the sacrifices of the Nesiim, of the different tribes that they brought in the Mishkan. So that's also something that we're going to address. So let's jump right in. So Bahaloscha Saneres. Yeah, you have it, page 10.
Yes, good.
Bahaloscha Saneres. So when you light the neres, the candle, we're talking about the menorah. Well, Pirush Rashi, so Rashi in the beginning of the Parsha says the following: Keshero Aaron Chanukas Anesiim, when Aaron saw the inauguration that they did when they brought all the sacrifices, and the Torah recounts that in great length from last week's Parsha. So Chol Shadaite, so Aaron became weak. He became he was saddened by the fact that he wasn't with them during this period. He didn't have a role in the inauguration of the Mishkan. Amar le'akadosh baruch hu, so Hashem told him, Chayecha Shilcha Gadol Mishalhem. Chayecha means I swear to you. It's a terminology that it means your life, but the terminology in the context of the Gemara and Medrash, Chayecha means I swear to you. Shelecha, yours is greater than theirs. Your function and your participation, your role is greater than their role. Sha'ata madlik umeiti v'saneres, because you're the one that cleans and that lights and cleans the candles. In other words, there's the part the menorah had what you had to do with the menorah at night and what you do in the morning. At night it's called lahadlik, to light the menorah, and then in the morning they were made to v'saneres. They cleaned out the neres that were lit at night, and they used to also light. If it went out, they lit it. There's different opinions exactly what the hatava was, how exactly it went down. But the idea is that Aaron was the one that was charged with the menorah. So Hashem is telling him, what you're doing is much greater than theirs. So we need to understand, we need to understand this. What was their function there? Meaning the Nesiim, the tribes, the leaders of the tribes. What was their function in the inauguration of the Mishkan, and what was Aaron's function in the Mishkan? And we need to understand what each function was and why Aaron's function was much greater than their function. Another thing that we need to understand. So that's one topic. Although there's all going to be brought together. And also we need to understand what it says further on in the Parsha. So this is what we mentioned in the introduction, was the discussion when Moshe Rabbeinu was asked by the Jewish people, by the Yidden, to give them meat. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, and he quotes, Hatzoinu bakar yishachad lachem. Can I slaughter for them sheep and cattle?
He says to Hashem.
Yeah, he's saying to Hashem, he's saying, how can I give them meat? Can I give them cattle? How am I able to? How are we able to? How are we able to provide tzaynu bakar, sheep and cattle, for the Jewish people? So the Alter Rebbe asks, Ma'u atmiya, what is the question that Moshe Rabbeinu is bothered with? In other words, why is Moshe Rabbeinu questioning whether Hashem is able to provide sheep and cattle? Halayesh ba'olam hayinumis. There are 70 nations. In other words, as if the Jewish people are so many that Hashem can't provide sheep and cattle for them to eat. Yesh ba'olam einumis, there is in the world 70 nations. Ve'hem riba revavis, yesim itaf reish elef, and there are 10,000 times 10,000, more than 600,000. In other words, more than the 600,000 of the amount that the Jewish people were. They eat meat and everything. They have enough. So why is what's the wonder? What's the question? As if there's not enough meat to go around. There's enough meat in the world. So why wouldn't there be enough for the Jewish people in the desert? And this. So obviously we understand that this discussion, this dialogue that's taking place between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem is much different than the simple understanding. The simple understanding is if there's not enough meat for them, obviously doesn't make any sense. So there has to be something much deeper here that we are alluding to. And another question that screams to us that there's a deeper narrative here that we're not picking up. The Gam Mashakasav is called the Gei Hayam. Moshe Rabbeinu is also in Im is called the Gei Hayam when he mentions the fish of the sea, as if there are not enough fish. But who talked about fish? B'chlal. They didn't. They asked for meat. They didn't ask for fish. So why, in his response, does he mention fish? So again, this tells us that the dialogue that's taking place between them is something deeper. There's something else going on. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Halehem shalu basar v'lo shalu dagan klal. They asked for meat. They didn't ask for fish. So now we're gonna lay things out. He's gonna set up as we usually do. He introduces it for Inyan. The Inyan is as follows. The concept is as follows, and he's going to set things so now that we can delve deeper and understand what exactly is going on. So the first objective, or the first question that he asks is we need to understand the whole story with Aaron and the menorah, and he felt left out. He felt weakened by this. And Hashem tells him, no, yours is greater. So the lighting of the menorah, the bringing of the karbanis. Now we need to understand this whole discussion that took place between Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yidden, Hashem, the Jewish people, and Hashem, to understand the whole story with the meat and what was actually provided for them. What was provided is what was called the slav. The slav was this fatty bird that flew in. They had so much that they didn't even know what to do. It was coming out of their nostrils. It was when you have too much of something, it's then it becomes.
It was a bird that was
repulsive.
Very accessible.
No, this was a miracle that the birds came. They flew down, and the whole camp was covered. The Torah describes it was out with this meat, and this love. The meat of this bird was so fatty. The Gemara describes that if you took 13, if you roasted it or whatever, baked it in the oven, and you put layers of bread underneath it, 13 loaves of bread. So even the 13th loaf, the lowest loaf, was so saturated with the fat of the bird that you wouldn't be able to eat it on its own. You would have to mix it with something else. That's how fatty the bird was. But of course, once we explain what's really going on and the narrative that's really happening and the discussion that's taking place, we'll understand the significance of this fat. It wasn't just a part of the delicacy of the bird, but it has a very deep message that is connected with the general message of meat in general. But we'll see that soon. So So first, we want to preface by saying, Alter Rebbe says the Maisa Karbanis Shal Nasiim, when they brought the sacrifices, Shekol Nasi Hela Shifta Aide Karbane. Every tribe elevated his tribe as a result through the carbon. So in other words, you had the 12 Nasiim, you had the 12 leaders of their tribe. And they, each one, remember last week, we read it all in the Parsha. So they, through bringing their sacrifices, even though they were identical, all the sacrifices were identical, what they brought, which is a discussion within itself. But nevertheless, each one, they brought their sacrifice, and the point, the objective of bringing the sacrifice was to inaugurate the Mishkan. But in the process, what were they doing? They were elevating their tribe. So every Nasi, a Nasi also comes from the word Nasai, to be lifted up. So the function of a Nasi is to lift up his generation. Over here, each Moshe Rabbeinu was the Nasi, the general Nasi. He was also considered a Melech, a king. Moshe Rabbeinu lifted up his generation, but specifically, each tribe had a Nasi, and the function of the Nasi of that tribe was to lift up that tribe. So how did they do that? They did that through bringing the sacrifices in the Mishkan. So what is it about the carbon? What is it about the sacrifice what specifically are they doing when they bring a sacrifice that lifts up their tribe? So he says as follows. So now we're going to go on a tangent. We're going to go on a tangent and explain several ideas. We're going to explain the idea, the meat, food, eating, and the role that the food plays in our lives, etc. And then we're going to get back to specifically meat. But here, let's just wanted to, this is where we're going with all this. The tzarech lav, and we need to understand. The Amr Azal, this seemingly is a side question, but really this is connected with the subject matter. It says in the Gemara, Am ha'aretz asur lechel basar. An Am ha'aretz, someone who's an Am ha'aretz, means someone who is a person who's too connected with the aretz, with the ground, meaning too physical, too coarse, not refined. We juxtapose two names here, and this is something that is used quite frequently in many, many different contexts. So you need to know what the context is, what the meaning is depending on the context. So here, there's Amaretz and Talmud Chacham. Amaretz is someone who is connected by he's trapped by the Aretz, by physicality. That's what it's called, Am Ha'aretz. And then you have a Talmud Chacham, who's someone who receives from Chachma. Talmud Chacham is someone who studies. It's referred to loosely as someone who is a scholar, right? Someone who's studying. But in this context, we're talking about Talmud Chacham, someone who receives from Chachma. So in other words, he's receiving from a level of Chachma, but Am Ha'aretz is someone who's receiving or is connected with the Aretz, with the physicality. So the Gemara says that Am Ha'aretz asur lechel basar, and Am Ha'aretz is not allowed to eat meat. Why? Because he can't elevate the meat. In other words, being that he's in such a low state, meat requires and we'll soon see why, but meat requires a very difficult, challenging avodah, a difficult task in order to elevate it. A person who's an Am Ha'aretz, a person who's coarse, who's connected bound by physicality, he's not able to find that path, have the strength to be able to elevate the meat. How can you elevate something? A person, in order to elevate something, you have to be higher than it. You can't be below something and elevate it. You have to be above it, and then only then can you elevate. So to someone who's an Amaretz, who's below it, who's connected with physicality, how can he elevate the meat? So from there we understand, from this Gemara, so we're backing into it. So from here we understand. There's a concept of a person, someone who's eating the food, and the food that he's eating, and that when he eats the food, he's lifting up the food, he's elevating it. A person is higher than the food. And this is understood why Shuhu Medaber. A person, he's a Medaber. We know that there's Doimim Tzumeach Chai Medaber. He's a Medaber. He's the head of all the levels of Doimim Tzumeach Chai. And being that he is a Medaber, so he elevates the food which is lower than him. Whether it's the level of Doimim, whether it's the level of Tzumeach and the level of Chai. In a different place, it seems the opposite. What's the opposite? Over here, we're saying that the person's elevating the food. In a different place, it seems that the food elevates the person. And that also seems to be consistent with, even from a simple perspective, when you eat, you receive energy. If you wouldn't eat, you would die. So yes, the person's elevating the food, but from a different perspective, from a simpler perspective, it seems that the food is the question is, who is the mashpia and who is the mekabel? Mm-hmm. Who is the one that is the giver and who is the receiver? So right now, in the first equation, we're saying, who is the giver? The person. The person is giving what? He's elevating the food. So he's the mashpia, he's the one that's the influencer, and who's being influenced? The food. How is the food being influenced? Because it's being elevated. In the second, what we find, which seems to be the exact opposite, who is the mashpia? Who is the one that influences? The food influences. Who is the receiver? Who receives that energy, or that flow, influence from the giver? That's the person, and that's why it gives him strength, and he's able to be elevated. But that's on a simplistic level. But on a deeper level, we find also that food is the influencer, because as we're going to bring, and we've learned in other places, the Gemara says something interesting. The Gemara says that a child is not able to truly recognize his father and mother until he's able to digest grain. Until he's able to digest chita, which is grain, he's not able to truly recognize his parents. And we see, that's what the Gemara says. And we see from there that that who is the mashpia, right? Before we were talking about in general that it gives energy to the person. Over here we're seeing it even more specific, that it gives him das, it gives him awareness, which is intellect. The food is giving him intellect. So that is the exact opposite of what we said before. The mashpia here is the person, is the food, and the mekabel, the one who's receiving, is the person. Let's see that inside. The Amr Azal. So Chazal say in the beginning of the 6th chapter of Brachas, and the Talmud says, Ilon sha'achal Adam Rishon chita isa. Adam Rishon, one of the biggest mistakes people make, he ate from the tree. So it's depicted, and mistakenly so, and we find many things in the Torah and Tanakh, which is just misrepresented, because when you look at it, the simple meaning, it gives way to the imagination. So what do people think when they think of the tree of knowledge? What is it? What's the first? What's?
Good and evil.
It's an apple, right? That's what I mean. That's so the idea is that this is a misrepresent. What I'm saying is it's a misrepresentation of what really happened. And in order to understand Torah, as we know, you have to learn Torah Shebal Peh. You need to have the oral Torah. Otherwise, it's a closed book. It's cryptic. You don't know what's going on. But anyway, the Gemara has a discussion. What exactly was the tree of knowledge? So one opinion, it says that chita hesa, and that's what we're not discussing that particular subject. But the point is that it was a chita. It was wheat. Now, why it's called a tree is a discussion in itself. But the idea is not that. The idea is that what do we see? That it's a tree of knowledge. That means it's a tree that gives knowledge. What knowledge is the tree giving? So we have a representation of that. With the way it's depicted in the Torah is much greater. But over here we have a representation of that. Until the taste of grain. Hare. So what do we understand from this Gemara? That a person is on the receiving end. So again, who the giver and who is the influencer, who is the giver and who is the receiver seems to be. We have two perspectives here. One is that the person is the giver and the influencer, and he influences the food, he elevates the food. And the other one we have that the food is the influencer, and he's influencing the person. And we bring another proof of that. In other words, the first proof that the food is the influencer and the giver is from the fact that what the Gemara says that the Eitz Hadas was a chita. And the idea that the Gemara says is that a person doesn't know who his parents are, his father, mother, until he eats grain. And also, this is another proof that the food is the influencer. Rav Nachman says, till before I ate the meat of an ox, I wasn't able to respond to your question. In other words, he didn't have the capacity to respond to the question because he didn't eat yet. And specifically, he didn't eat meat, but he didn't eat yet. Because he didn't eat, so he didn't have the ability to be able to respond to him. Again, what do we see from that? This idea that who is the influencer? That the influencer is the food, and the receiver is the person. So which one is it? That's the question the Alter Rebbe is asking. Which one is it? So Shnei Emes, both are true. Both are true. They're not mutually
independent,
exclusive, right? They're mutually inclusive. Shehem lemata min nefesh ha'adam u'lemayla imen. Both. The heim, mean the food, is lemata and lemayla. V'hainu ki kol ha'taimim shekol min tzmachim u'peres v'cham ha'basar shel chayis u'behemos. So all foods, in other words, whether it's in the realm of tzimeach, which is the vegetative, or it's in the realm of chai, shorsham hu me'elam hatoyu. So when we go from a Kabbalistic standpoint, from a perspective of understanding where everything comes from, so where is the shorish? Where does food come from? It comes from the world of toyu. And Shehu B'chinas Olam HaNekudim, which is also referred to as Olam HaNekudim, and Shelemaylam Atzilus Shu Brudim, which is above Atzilus, which is Brudim. Now, the Alter Rebbe doesn't explain here these terminologies, but just we've had this before. The world of Toyu is the world of chaos. In the world of Toyu, you have a lot of a lot of light, and very, very little kalim. And understanding it, that's a much more in-depth understanding in itself to understand the world of Toyu. But it suffices right now just to say that Toyu is higher than Tikkun. It's also called Nikudim, because Nikudim means dots. That means that each level, each sphera in the world of Toyu is separate one from the other. And therefore, because of that, it brought about a shattering of the vessels, and then it had to be fixed. The fixing of that is called the world of Tikkun, which is the world of Atzilus and An. And he says, besides Tikkun, it's also called Brudim. Brudim are stripes, because stripes is the opposite of, we have find by the sheep of Yaakov, so we have these terminologies. Brudim is the opposite of having individuals, dots, but it's striped together means they're merging, connected with each other. And that's what the idea of Tikkun is to fix, is to merge things, that it shouldn't be separate, and it shouldn't be fragmented, so it should be brought together. That's it in a nutshell. If you want to know more about the world of Toyu and Tikkun, there's the English Tanya has there's mystical concepts of Chassidus in the old translation. It's in the back, so there's the different topics there that are discussed, and one of them is the Toyu and Tikkun. So there, it obviously is much more elaborative and explains much more. But for here, and sometimes actually the Meyer, the focus is on that. Over here, the focus is not so much on that, but this is just to know that the shirish, where food comes from, whatever food we're talking about, whether we're talking about the tzemeach, from the vegetable, or we're talking about the chai, so that comes from the world of Toyu. The person, the Adam, is from Tikkun. So now, so from this standpoint of the shirish, so what is higher? Toe. So what is higher? The food is higher than the person, than the Adam. So he elaborates further. Where does the chai come from? The chai, the animal kingdom, comes from the chayis of the Merkava. There was a chariot that Yecheskel saw in his vision. And on the chariot, it's described there that you have chayis. You have the face of an ox. You have the face of a lion. Now obviously we're talking about spiritual levels. We're talking about angels. But the only way we can describe it is by using these terminologies, but we right away understand that we're not talking about physical things. So you have the face of an ox, you have the face of a lion, you have the face of an eagle, you have the face of an Adam. And this was like a four sides to a cube in abstractly. And that were the description of the chayis. That was the beasts that were carrying the Merkava, the chariot. Then you have the Merkava, you have a kisei. You have a throne on the Merkava. And then you have on the throne, you have an Adam. This is the vision that Yecheskel saw. So what we're interested here is that these two things, the idea that you have the chayis and then you have an Adam. So where does the animal kingdom trace back to? It traces back to the chayis of the Merkava, of the chariot. Pnei Aryeh, he outlines the three. Pnei Aryeh hu mekar nafshis hachayis. Aryeh, the face of the lion, that represents the chayis. The chayis, in other words, the chayis that exists in the world, in this world. Upnei shor, that's the source of the chayis. Upnei shor hu mekar nafshis abehemis. Upnei nesher mekar nafshis ha'efes. So each one is the source of the eagle is a source of birds, the ox is a source of behemoths, and the aryeh is a source of chayes. So now let's go deeper, further into this merkava, this chariot. The chayes are lifting up the kisei. V'ala kisei. So that's the phenomenon that's taking place. V'ala kisei k'mara adam. Hu b'china. What is the mara adam? Obviously, we're not talking about a physical person. So we're talking about conceptually. What does a person represent? So he's going to explain. A person represents, when we look at something, and something, and in other words, when something appears in a certain way, it gives us insight into what it represents. When we look at the difference between a person and an animal, so what we see is the person, he's upright. So his head is above his heart, and his heart is above the rest of the body. So be below the heart. And that shows that there's a hierarchy that of the person, that his intellect, which is the brain, the head, rules over the heart, and the heart is above the rest of the body. By an animal, so we see it's all on one line. It looks all equal. So that's the difference. When we talk about Adam here, when we say Adam that is on the chariot, we're referring to Adam in the sense that it has this dynamic, it has this description of, you have the intellect, but there we're not talking about human intellect, we're talking about intellect in an abstract way, and then you have the emotion. The emotion in an abstract sense, chesed, gevura, kindness, and severity, etc. So the chachma is above, and it is infusing, it is actually bringing about that there can be harmony within the emotions. When you have the emotion and the intellect on one line, so then there's no harmony. That's when you have chaos, which is the world of Tayu, which is the root of all animals. But when you have that, so when we say Adam, what do we mean when we say Adam? Adam means harmony. Adam means that you have a system. It's systematic. It's a whole organization of different parts, and they're functioning in unison, and they're functioning in an orderly manner. So this Adam is referring to the 10 spheres of the world of Tikkun, that they now become rectified, meaning they become fixed, they become organized in the parts in the visage of an Adam. That's what we mean when we say Adam. And this is similar to the progression that takes place by the person, his limbs. In other words, this system is a reflection, really it's the opposite. The person below is a reflection of that system. The system that everything is in an organized manner, everything, the way his body operates. Now, the way the body is formed, so too is the nefesh that is within the body. The nefesh, just like you have a keli, you have a vessel, and then you have the content, which is you put in the vessel. So the content that you put inside the vessel takes the shape of the vessel. Over here, we're saying that the Hashem made it in such a way that the Adam, the keli, which is the body, is exactly formed and shaped in order to receive the content, which in this discussion we're talking about, the nefesh, is now being invested within the body. So that's why you see the body, the person, the keli is made in one way, and by an animal it's made in a different way. That's what he's saying here. shemayach sheira machshava. In the brain, that's where you have the machshava. That's where you have the thought. Ubepeh hadibur, and in the mouth you have speech. Ubiyadayim koyach hamaisa. Now, each one of these, thought, speech, and action, can also be described by intellect, emotion, and action. The intellect is connected with the thought. Emotion is connected with speech, because what fuels what gives the speech life is the emotion. You can tell what a person is feeling, and then you have the action. So that is the Rosh Tevas of Adam. The Aleph, the Dalet, and the Mem. The Aleph refers to Machshava, which is thought, because the word, if you take the word Aleph and you invert it, the opposite, it comes to, you have the word Pella. Pella means concealed and hidden, a wonder that's hidden, which is the idea of Machshava, which is concealed. You don't know what someone else is thinking. It's not graspable. But then you have Dibur. The Dalet is the Dibur, which is how he articulates himself, and then you have Maisa. Also in the Asar Sfiros, you also have this breakdown. It's not obviously in a physical sense, but there also is. Now, so he ends off. I'm skipping a little because we have to finish off. I know we didn't even scratch the surface here. So now that we know the root, where the food comes from, it comes from the chayis of the merkav. In other words, the same dynamic that we see with food, that from one side the person is mashpia into the food, he elevates the food, and from the other side the food is the mashpia to the person. So the same thing we see with the source of the food, which is the animals of the chariot. So from one side we say that they're noises as akise, that they lift up the person. Which person? The person we're talking about, the Adam, which is riding the chariot. But at the same time, how do they lift up how do they lift up? Because they come from a much higher shirish. They come from a much higher place. We said before that where do they come from? It comes from the world of Toyu. The world of Toyu is higher than the world of Tikkun. So therefore, that gives them, within them, they have the ability to influence the Adam, which comes from the world of Tikkun. But at the same time, they're also elevated. As a result, meaning they're elevated that they elevate the person. They through the food, they become also, the person on the chariot also becomes elevated. So first of all, the person elevates the chayis, and also how? Because the person is able, the way the person has seichel, and at the same time the chayis become elevated. Okay, we'll stop here and.
So why is so fatty? The